Hello, everyone. My name is Joshua Gilliland. I'm one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. With me to discuss part one of our catch-up on Picard, because we're practicing attorneys and things like discovery deadlines and motion practice frequently happens, and we got busy. We got to catch up on Star Trek Picard. With me to do so is Dana Nicholas and Nari Ely. And tonight we're going to hit 3 episodes, starting with 17 Seconds, No Win Scenario, and Imposters. Nari, how are you?
I'm doing real great. It's been a long time since I've been with you, Josh, and I've missed it. It's super fun to be back. And I have to say, so far this season of Picard is easily the best one yet. I'm really loving it.
Yeah, and we can have a nice Picard Rolaren exchange to make sure it's the real Nari Ely. So, Dana, how are you?
I'm doing great. This is wonderful. So Nari, what was the last conversation we had before you left?
Oh no. But wait, no, let me just poke my hand and show some blood. That'll be enough, right?
No, that's not enough.
Yeah.
No longer enough.
Yeah, it's been a while, and we're also fresh off of WonderCon. Dana, you presented at one of our 2 panels. Tell us what the Wednesday panel was like.
The Wednesday panel was a lot of fun. This was my first time at WonderCon, and I have to say it didn't disappoint. It was absolutely fabulous, and I would do it again. WonderCon, just letting you know. Wednesday was a great look at all of the legal issues that happen around Nevermore Academy and the town of Jericho, and what their liability might be under different scenarios. And so it was a lot of fun. We had a great time. We met a lot of things in hands, and it was great fun.
And the audio for that panel is now live, and you can hear the very dynamic exchange between California Judge Carol Nahara and U.S. Magistrate Judge Mitch Debin, which might be the most playful I've ever seen judges talking about the law, and it was a rip-roaring good time. So it was very giggle-worthy while getting into some deep legal issues. It just rocked.
Thanks for not mentioning that I got smacked down by Judge Debin. That's okay.
It's for him, that's sport. That means he really likes you. So
he really does like me. It's all good.
He is super fun. So
he's fun. But what I forgot to mention when he said that he had never been overturned is I too have never been overturned. When I convict them, they stay convicted.
Yeah, neither he or Judge Nahara they've been appealed but never overturned, so they're very good. Well, let's get into
I was actually going to say that seems like the prime opportunity to mention our traditional disclaimer. I think that nothing on this podcast should be construed as legal advice, and the views expressed here do not reflect the views of our employers.
Right,
absolutely.
This is for fun. It's education, it's infotainment, as we talk about the law in a fictional TV show. This does not mean go throw asteroids at cars. Yes, don't do that.
If you're planning to commandeer a spaceship, you may want to seek your own legal counsel.
And even then, the crime fraud exception might torpedo that advice. So there's that as well. Good thing that's not in the news. So let's get into 17 Seconds. One of the things I thought was funny about this episode was it also, the same week, the 17th chapter of The Mandalorian also aired. So I thought, that's kind of weird that we get 17 2 nights in a row in the title of 2 flagship sci-fi programs. So just the odds for that to happen are extremely high. 17 Seconds. We see Worf come back. I mean, more than the cameo that we had, we get this glorious introduction that's now on t-shirts. Worf, son of Moog, House of Martog, son of Sergi, House of Shrenko, bane to the Duras family, slayer of Galron. And would you like some tea? So I just absolutely adore Michael Dorn, and he is such a joy. to see it. It looks like he's just having a rip-roaring good time. You just want to hang out and invite him over for tacos.
For tea.
or tea. We could do tea. I understand he's vegan, so like whatever, we'll do that. So we have the issue of Picard finds out that he has a son at the end of the prior episode. And we have a huge exchange between he and Beverly about where was my kid? Like, why didn't you tell me? And so it's acting at its finest. It's high drama. That's one of the big issues that happens. They're dealing with being on the run from the Shrike and Captain Vadic. And so they're trying to stay alive. Riker ends up in command because Shaw is really badly injured. Compound break in his leg, looks like a concussion. So he needs a little time to heal, and that's not like a quick, it's a mere flesh wound. So he needs a little time to heal, and that's actually good that he turns command over. But we find out that we got changelings running around. We're getting hunted by the Shrike, and we have Rafi and Worf doing their investigation. So, crimes by changelings. Let's talk about false impersonation, because we find out that, well, by the end of the episode, we find out that the transporter chief was being mimicked by a changeling. Dana, would you like to talk about false impersonation?
Oh, sorry, Dana, if you'd like to go first. But I also put this part into the outline, so I'm happy to talk about it.
Oh, Nari, please, by all means, false impersonation.
Yes. So I was going to say, first fun fact is that it is also known as false personation because the falsehood sort of, or wrongness is sort of implied in the impersonation. But false impersonation is a crime in every jurisdiction, although the exact wording and statute will vary. It's typically a state, like most crimes, it is typically a state statute rather than a federal crime. And in particular, it's not just any impersonation. If I decided to, for example, as a fun April Fool's joke, because we're just one day shy of it, decided to, pretend to be Josh for something, to pull a prank or something like that, that would not necessarily be a crime. So sensibly, most of these statutes, and in particular the one that I looked at for this, which was the California statute, which is, for the legal geeks listening, Penal Code Section 529, it specifies that you have to have falsely impersonated another in either his or her private or official capacity, and in that assumed character, done one of a listed number of prohibited acts. So I would be fine with my April Fool's joke, assuming I didn't do one of these things. So the listed acts that you can undertake that would then put you into criminal liability zone are becomes bail or surety for any party in any proceeding whatever before any court or officer authorized to take that bail or surety. So basically, I could not take bail for Josh. You cannot, number 2, verify, publish, acknowledge, or prove in the name of any other person any written instrument with the intent that the same may be recorded, delivered, or used as true. So that one also kind of like makes common sense. So I couldn't, as part of my April Fool's joke, go open a bank account as Josh Gilliland, or sign over a deed of property, or any other number of things that would involve written instruments. And then the last one, also, pretty commonsensical, and it's a huge catch-all. Does any other act whereby, if done by the person falsely personated, he might in any event become liable to any suit or prosecution, or to pay any sum of money, or to incur any charge, forfeiture, or penalty, or whereby any benefit might accrue to the party personating or to any other person. It's a huge catch-all. So what it basically means in more common parlance is you cannot do something that would, acting as Josh Gilliland for my April Fool's joke, I could not do something that would cause Josh to become civilly or criminally liable for anything, or to put him on the hook for any money, or to do it for personal gain or to benefit another. So if you're having fun and you're not doing any of those things, you're fine. Josh, I think our changeling might be in trouble.
Yeah, and first off, you would have a hard time impersonating me. I do have an X factor, and I don't know if you can pull it off.
But I
That-
thought we established at the start that I'm a changeling. Oh wait, no, never mind.
yeah, so you got that cooking. Dana, anything to add?
I think that she wrapped it up nicely in a nice little bow. That was absolutely perfect. You perfectly impersonated me.
But to no personal gain and no written instruments were signed, so I'm fine. But Josh, the changelings that are in this episode, and we can get to also the future episodes that we're going to cover, or we can wait for it then. But in this particular episode, there are changelings are doing things that undoubtedly are going to cause, fall into one of these buckets, probably the last one, but presumably they're doing things that are going to incur civil and criminal liability, trespassing, doing things to benefit themselves and their, I guess, terrorist organization, which I think would count.
On top of that, there are the computer crimes associated with false impersonation, which is a separate section. And again, impersonating someone over the internet or a computer system, that's under, in California Penal Code section 528.5A. You also get unauthorized computer access on top of that, which gets into the issue of, this is California section, Penal Code section 502C1, accessing data. Starships have computers, and we're in multiple episodes, changelings are accessing Starfleet computers, sending messages purporting to be other characters that we know and love. Yeah, that's a problem. They are clearly committing computer crimes with false pretenses. Dana, anything to add on top of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when these changelings are pretending to be people, they're not changing out everyone. So what about their spouses? What about the people who they're in contact with on a regular basis? If they had any touchy-feely moments with any of these folks, then they could be charged with sexual battery, or they could be sued civilly, even if it doesn't rise to a criminal sexual battery because the person thought they were consenting, but they were consenting to the wrong person. And that would be a sexual battery under California Civil Code 1708.5, which just requires an unauthorized touching by a person that's offensive to that person, to that person's intimate part, or you could, and the intimate part has been interpreted to be anything with a hole in it, or just kissing someone. There we go.
I'm starting to wonder now, how does that apply with the changeling? But but that's not the point.
No, if they're pretending to be someone else.
Yeah, I got that, but my mind went somewhere else. But those are all excellent points.
So this is not an After Dark episode, so we're not going to cross some of those lines. Think of the children. But on the note of think of the children.
I actually had one more thing, sorry. Since my brain started going with the things that Dana was saying. I think also it's important to note that not only are there crimes associated specifically with the impersonation, but there's now, because they are not the person that they're claiming to be, as Dana was just pointing out, there's all other kinds of crimes that can accrue, or liabilities that can accrue. They are not actually supposed to be in these places, on those starships, which would be trespass, potentially of a military vehicle or facility, gaining access to a military facility by fraud. All of those are crimes, especially because it's specifically a military installation or ship. Those would also be federal. And so, you would get the feds coming, or I guess Starfleet in this case, coming after you. And so, yeah, so there's all the things also that not just the actual act of impersonation, but because they don't actually have permission to be doing all the things that they're doing, whole hosts of other liabilities would attach.
And it would also create a very stressful chain of command situation that we will see at the end of the last episode we cover, with you have to follow lawful orders. If you find out that there's somebody in charge who is not actually that person, that invalidates all the orders that purported individual has done. So that gets very weird very quickly on what do you do here. So pivoting from that, because we will definitely come back to some false impersonation issues, is the issue, does Picard have an negligent emotional distress claim against Beverly, or intentional? Because she had a kid, named it after her first dead husband, didn't tell the biological father. I would be very upset, because thinking in terms of like, oh, I'm a dad now, if that happened. Picard wanted to be involved in his kid's life, and finding out like, oh, he's 23. I'm sure there's no resentment issues there from never getting to play catch or do any family things that normally would happen. Very, very stressful on him, which, goes to that beautiful scene where Picard and Beverly have the discussion of, I could protect my son, I couldn't protect your son because you have a target on your back. Do we think, either of you think that crosses into a potential claim for infliction of emotional distress, either negligent or intentional?
I'm going to say that this is a great example of something where it may not have been the right thing to do, but I don't think it caused liability or was illegal. And there's two reasons for that. The first, for the negligent, is that in general, I'm unaware of any exceptions to this, where at least where I'm sitting right now. In general, negligent infliction of emotional distress is like a exacerbator of severity of punishment, and it's not its own tort that you can bring. It has to be attached essentially to another tort. Intentional infliction of emotional distress is, it's typically pretty, well, first of all, it has to be, you have to have intended to do the thing, to cause the thing. But the second part is it's typically something really severe. Like the prototypical law school example is, somebody pretends like or acts like they're about to hit your child in the street with their vehicle and then swerves away at the last second. You never intended to hit the kid with the vehicle, but you intended to cause the person watching, who you knew was watching, to feel this intense emotional distress and thereby caused them harm. And so in this case, she was aware that Picard would probably want to know and that she was keeping it from him. I think it's a bit of a stretch to say that what she was doing was something that was so beyond the pale and intention and designed to cause him this kind of distress that it would give rise to liability. Dana, do you agree with me?
I'm right there with you. And I think that a lot of it has to do with choice. Because if she found out that she was pregnant and she decided to terminate the pregnancy, she wouldn't have a duty to Captain Picard to tell him or advise him. And since she's not seeking any type of support, I don't think that she has any duty to him. And so that first step is what's required in order for us to have negligent infliction of emotional distress or intentional infliction of emotional distress. I agree, it was a pretty crummy, rotten thing to do for both him and the child, and naming him after your dead husband. Well, Picard tells us in the episode, or in a later episode, I would have named you the same thing anyway, because he was my best friend. So it's probably not as bad as it sounds, but that's still drama worthy.
Yeah, I have very mixed feelings. It's a horrible thing to do to someone, with like, by the way, here's your kid. Don't do that. It's just horrible. So, which is why we get to the name of the episode of 17 Seconds, because Riker shares, the birth of his son Thaddeus, being a complicated birth, and the amount of time it took him to get to sickbay was 17 seconds. Picard has his 17-second moment, if it did indeed take that amount of time to get to sickbay, of that long wait. Like if you've ever had a loved one in the ER, yeah, like, it's kick down the doors and go make sure they're okay. So he gets that after Jack gets poisoned, when they realize they have a changeling problem. So, all right. Anything else from this episode before we, hazarding a vessel. There's a debate through between Riker and Picard about, do we go on the offensive with the Shrike or do we cut and run? Riker is taking the cut and run position, which seems very alien from the Riker from TNG. We find out the reason why is he's been a dad, he lost a kid, and all of that was super traumatic to him, which is why he's the cautious type, doesn't want to write any letter saying, "I'm sorry, your kid died." Okay, dynamic, he changed, he's 70, people evolve over time. Picard is the mindset of like, we can take them down now because we have the element of surprise. Now, the original plan was we will trick them into going into a place and then we'll come up from behind to shoot them and kill them from behind. It's very Enterprise, Wrath of Khan, thinking three-dimensionally with taking out the Reliant. They don't follow their own plan. Thus, it doesn't work because they do their maneuver, and instead of coming up on the Shrike stern, they're broadside, which is in naval terms, it's you can be like head to head, but there's also a maneuver called crossing the T, which really doesn't work as well as starships. That the T would be on an old sailing ship, you have like your port or starboard side aimed at the bow of another ship. That means you could have all of your guns fire, while on the other ship, in an old sailing ship, they don't have guns forward, or maybe just two, so you can't do broadsides. Or if you're dealing with battleships, like 2 out of your 3 turrets being able to fire as opposed to all of them. It almost looks like Shrike crosses the T in this episode, but that doesn't, again, unless they had weapons on their starboard side, that really doesn't make it effective. But it doesn't matter because they didn't follow their own attack plan. And so instead of trying to bail out, they decide to fire, which then causes the Shrike to use the portal weapon. So the Titan ends up shooting itself with its own photon torpedoes, and the episode ends with it sinking into the nebula. And Riker saying something very uncharacteristic of Picard with "remove yourself from the bridge." So it's like watching your dad and grandpa fight. You feel dirty afterwards and confused, and you just feel hurt. And that's how the episode ends. Good cliffhanger. Is that hazarding a vessel? So did either Riker or Picard hazard the vessel? And under military law, you have an improperly handling a vessel or aircraft. Any person subject to this chapter who willfully and wrongfully hazards or suffers to be hazard any vessel or aircraft of the armed forces shall be punished by death or such other punishment as a court-martial may direct. And that's 10 USCS section 910. Nara, do you want to take the first swing at, did either of them get into hazarding the vessel?
So I think I would be voting to take the defense position here. And it's because in this provision that you just read off for us from the UCMJ or US code, it includes the word willfully. So in all criminal law, there has to be, well, with very, very, very narrow exceptions, there always has to be some wrongful state of mind. Lawyers call it mens rea. And the least, sort of on a spectrum of the least being negligent, and the most stringent standard being willfully. So willfully means not only did you know, so it's knowledge, and not only did you intend, you basically have to have also intended this wrong/unlawful result. So in this case, like, for example, I know it's not quite the right example, but in white collar crime, willfully basically means that you have to have even been aware of the law that you were violating, which is sort of this funny exception. But in this case, I assume it's not necessarily that you have to have known that, been aware of this provision and have intended to violate it, but you have to have intended the result to be hazarding the vessel. I think it's written that way in particular because we assume that people with their boats, people in the military with boats are going to be, and ships are going to be doing things that are risky. And so if you do something, in this case, the intent being to save the ship and defeat the Shrike, and it goes awry and you end up hazarding the vessel, you're not supposed to get stuck under this statute because you weren't intending to hazard the vessel. I imagine a lot of military operations result in hazarding vessels, but not intentionally.
But the code says willfully or wrongfully. So wrongfully is
and wrongfully.
Okay. Okay.
Well, I would venture to guess that maybe this is like some other criminal torts within the state of California and other jurisdictions where the willful conduct doesn't necessarily have to be the intended outcome, but can be the willful conduct to do the act itself. So if you intentionally tried to somersault a spaceship on its end by slamming on brakes, and somehow you harmed the crew, then the willful isn't that you wanted to harm the crew, but the willful was the negligent act that you committed. So you had to intend the act that caused the problem. And so perhaps that's what it is, but without further research, I couldn't say. But I would say that maybe grabbing a ship that was intended to go someplace else and taking them to a nebula to hunt down someone who you think is being under attack, that might be hazarding the crew.
I'm gonna defend my position here that I think it is the super high version of willfully because of the punishment that's involved here. I mean, granted, it says or other such punishment as a court-martial may direct, but it says shall be punishable by death. And I have to imagine, taking out the boat and, like you were saying, doing some speed runs, and then which would be doubtlessly reckless and resulting in hazarding a vessel would be a very serious offense. And I would speculate that there is a lesser offense that would fall under in the code. But for this particular one to be punishable by death, boy, I hope they meant the really high standard.
And there's historical examples from World War II that get into people not getting charged. So Lieutenant Jack Kennedy on PT 109 got run over by a Japanese destroyer. And I heard one sailor say you have to be as blind as a Kennedy to get run over by a destroyer. He was not court-martialed for that. It made him a hero because he dragged guys to shore. They screwed up. They got run over. Captain Charles McVeigh the third of the USS Indianapolis was not zigzagging after delivering the atomic bomb to Trinidad Delay, and they were sunk by Japanese submarine I-58. He was court-martialed for that. He got death threats and nasty letters for the rest of his life. He did rise up in ranks to admiral, but that haunted him until he died of a hunting accident on his front yard with a pistol. Yeah. So we generally don't prosecute someone who loses a vessel to enemy fire. There might be other examples, but I haven't read every case under the sun. But the Indianapolis is the big one from World War II, where they brought in the Japanese commander to testify at McVeigh's court-martial. So I don't think Riker or Picard, they didn't follow their own plan. That's part of the problem with this, but I don't think they get convicted because of it.
And I'll back up my position a little bit and saying that the the code section states that it's the act that it's the willful that willfully or wrongfully hazards or suffers to be hazard. So they have to be the cause of the hazard. And so it's just, I don't think it would be enough for a third party to harm you. But if you harm the vehicle or the vessel yourself, I think that would be as much. But without further research, who knows what might happen in our fictitious universe.
I do want to agree with you a little bit, Dana, that anyway, the chain of causality involved here, like begins and ends with Riker and Picard. So when it comes to like, who caused this to happen, I agree. It's definitely going to be them. It just comes down to, what facts does the prosecutor really need to prove here? And for their sakes, I am hoping they have to prove a super high standard of mens rea.
Well, that and
Well,
Picard
that
was.
brings-
Go on, Dana.
Oh, sorry. I was going to go ahead and change the subject, but go right ahead.
Picard was also prosecuted for the loss of the Stargazer. And while cleared of that, there was still a court martial that followed where they were attacked by the Ferengi. So not unprecedented for a Star Trek commander to get court-martialed after a vessel loss. Which now brings us to no-win scenario. And I really do love how they're leaning into some good fan service and Trek lore with what is the concept of the no-win scenario. And this story is told with some flashbacks to Picard trying to eat lunch and getting hero worshipped and telling sea stories to young officers. But Riker's given up hope. So he's writing a letter to his wife, and it's like hoping that the remains of the ship are found. The captain's not supposed to get sulky. Like they have to not lose faith. And Picard's story time highlights the importance of don't lose faith and work with others. And we do get great conference room scenes where people are figuring out a solution, just like in the good old days of TNG of let's go to the conference room and we'll brainstorm a solution. Sometimes we do that in war rooms, sometimes we don't. But philosophically, was Riker right to give up hope? Dana?
You know me, the eternal optimist. So I would say, yeah, I mean, you really can't do that. He has to button it up. But I think that he does do a good job of expressing his humanity, if you want to call it that, in close quarters by himself. He's not out in the mess hall going, oh, we're all gonna die. He didn't do any of that. So I think that it shows his humanity, and he's, just a regular person, and he's like, wow, we're in deep trouble. But at the same time, he's still got to command the vessel.
Yeah, and parts of his bridge presence is pretty good in how he interacts with folks. So he does have the calming quality of dads here. So like you need that if you have like people 30 to 50 years younger than you have to emulate. We got this, guys. Let's do it. Like, or else everyone's going to panic with like, oh my God, we're all going to die. So they have to lean into this. So we have some notes here. Which among us listed is the crew of the Titan liable for trespass or battery for entering into the body/home of the space creature living in the nebula? That sounds like Nari, but I've been wrong. No, Dana, take it away.
Well, I mean, we have to think about it. There's this space creature is living in the nebula. This is its home, and probably its womb, so to speak, because it does give birth. So would it be battery to put a spaceship in the womb of an alien space creature? Maybe not. My answer is probably not, because they didn't know that they were even entering it. So in order to have a battery, you have to have the knowing touching or the knowing trespass into the property of another. And so they weren't really aware of it until after they were already there.
I agree with you. Nari, anything to add?
No, I think that was brilliant.
Wow, thank you. Can you call my mom and tell her I was brilliant?
Well,
I would really enjoy that. The one thing that I do think that spans between the last episode, 17 seconds, all the way through to the very end, including this episode, is stalking. Were the changelings stalking the crew, and were they stalking Jack Crusher? And so to have stalking, there's two types of stalking. There's a civil stalking and there's a criminal stalking. So we'll talk about the criminal stalking. And in California, under Penal Code Section 646.9, stalking is any person who willfully, maliciously, and repeatedly follows or willfully and maliciously harasses another person and makes a credible threat with the intent to place that person in reasonable fear for their safety or the safety of their immediate family. And it's punishable by up to a year in jail and a fine of not more than $1,000. But get this, it's a wobbler. And so what that means is that it can be charged as either a misdemeanor or as a felony. As a misdemeanor, it's up to a year in jail or $1,000 fine. I would argue that chasing someone around the universe, having them to jump from portal to portal, that kind of rises to felony conduct. And as felony conduct, they could get up to 5 years imprisonment. So there you have it.
Well done. Some other quick points with no win scenario. We get the C story about Picard and Jack Crusher getting invited by some lovely locals so they're highly motivated to borrow a shuttlecraft, and they get into some trouble and they have to like take 10 hours to get home. Guys do dumb things to impress women all the time, and that does sound like a court-martial type offense for what they did. So problematic. And that would be a very weird mock trial to do with. You thought that was a good idea? So there we go there. Then we also have the brilliant Shaw monologue. That's a lot like Quint's monologue from Jaws. Played by Robert Shaw. So I don't know how intentional the name Shaw was, but I'm glad they didn't go with Quint, because that would have been a little too on the nose. But we find out why he's not a fan of Picard.
And Seven, I think, at least his first impression.
Yeah, because it'd be like a World War II vet feeling uncomfortable around someone from either Japan or Germany in the 1970s. And like, depending on what they did and saw. I had a granduncle, his name was Griff, who was a POW in the Philippines. I think he survived the Bataan Death March, but there were things he didn't talk about. But as his grandson, my cousin, told me, Garrett said to Griff, "Hey, do you want to go get some sushi?" And the response was not positive about, I had enough of that in World War II. So is Shaw just full PTSD, like not dealing well with a Borg, and having an ex-Borg as your first officer, you understand him better. That doesn't mean you let that get in the way of being a good commanding officer. So, but it was a brilliant speech, well acted. So it made me go, I want a Titan TV series. So and Shaw and Seven learned to work together.
Yeah, I did want to add a little bit to that, which was just that I agree, first of all, that like that whole speech and the whole episode really does excuse a lot of what I think what any of us watching saw as originally off-putting, problematic, or downright wrong behavior from Captain Shaw. But I do want to point out that, notwithstanding how understandable and excusable it is, he would have had some hostile work environment problems prior to him coming to terms with Seven here. We've talked a little bit about this in other Star Trek contexts in the past, Josh, about whether or not something in science fiction would fit one of the protected classes for Title VII and similar things. And I do caveat that no, Title VII, I think, doesn't by its terms apply to the military, but there are other statutes and other orders that do. So it basically still applies. And in this case, I think, being ex-Borg is very arguably very arguably a race or other protected status. And it would be creating a hostile work environment specifically by discriminating against that person or targeting that person because of that protected class. And in this case, like you often in real cases, it's very hard to make that, it's a tough bill to make that connection, to find sort of this is, they're not just being a jerk, they're being a jerk because of this thing. But in this case, he says it at one point, I believe, to Seven, a very derogatory comment about her being ex-Borg. And so in those cases, like that would be the kind of thing that points you directly to, this is a hostile work environment, and it's because this person is a protected class. So prior to this coming to amends, Captain Shaw was going to be in some serious trouble. I assume that Seven is now no longer going to try to get him investigated for this, but she could have.
And I will say, Josh, you were right in the earlier episode when you said that they were going to try to redeem him. And I still stand by my earlier statement that I don't care. I still hate him.
Oh, I really like him. I think he's hilarious.
He's funny when I'm not working for him.
Yeah.
But I would never want to work for Shaw. But he's the kind of person who will tell it like it is. You know where you stand with him 100% of the time. And so, does he follow the rules? Absolutely. And perhaps that, he treated her improperly, but maybe he treated her within the rules, right? So she still was the number one. You didn't pass her over and pick somebody else on the ship. So he's still following the regulations, but I still don't like him.
It's fun to have dynamic characters. And like in this, I mean, it gets beyond the hobbling that Gene Roddenberry did to Next Gen when they started with like, no one can have conflict. People are beyond that now. And it took Roddenberry leaving for them to be able to start telling good stories with Ronald D. Moore and others at the wheel, and being able to go like, no, people are still going to have interpersonal relationships. People are still going to have trauma. So I enjoy
all ascend into a state of pure energy. We will have interpersonal conflicts and tension.
Well, I'm all for Roddenberry, and I think that you should only have personal conflict in the future if you're taken over by an alien. That being said, we're all governed by our gut, right? You got good bacteria and bad bacteria, and I just think that Shaw has way too much bad bacteria.
Don't eat alone, and maybe
so he needs to eat more fiber.
And don't
or get a cleanse or eat more fruit. I don't know.
Expand your palate beyond Malbec. I mean, it's good, but a Cabernet is pretty tasty as well. So he really should look ahead. And again, maybe the pain meds from Beverly help mellow him out some as well. So there's
and then there was the issue in the episode of him with Beverly giving him pain meds, and he says to Jack, your mom's pretty liberal with those pain meds, and yet he adds alcohol on top of the pain meds, and then he works on the vessel, we see later on. So is that drunken operation of a vehicle? Would that be drunk driving under the influence? I don't know.
Maybe they have some anti-hangover medicine that they could take to sober up. You think we would have developed something by the 25th century?
I was going to say, I thought by the 25th century it was all synthahol, unless you specifically got your own.
I will take the cheap whiskey. So there's, again, don't mix medication with alcohol. No good will come from it.
But even if it was synthahol on top of the pain meds were quite real. So
it does remind me of the fact that Scotty could drink someone under the table, and apparently one time did pass out because it was something green, but he did, perform at work after getting plastered. But that highlights, have a good work-life balance so you don't get stressed out and do weird things like that. So exercise. But let's get into Imposters. Brilliant episode. No Win Scenario might be my favorite so far because it was the most Trek feeling. Imposters is excellent as well. So we see a Vulcan named Kryn who looks like he's engaged in racketeering. And I'll run over the fact there's a Vulcan crime lord is wild. Is racketeering logical is my question. So the RICO, the Racketeering Influence and Corruption Organizations Act, states in relevant part, it shall be unlawful for any person who has received any income derived directly or indirectly from a pattern of racketeering activity or through collection of an unlawful debt in which such person has participated as a principal within the meaning of Section 2, Title 18, U.S. Codes 18 USCS Section 2, to use or invest directly or indirectly any part of such income or the proceeds of such income, an acquisition or any interest in, or the establishment or operation of any enterprise which is engaged in, or the activities of which affect interstate or foreign commerce. Is that Vulcan engaged in racketeering? I say yes.
I have, yeah.
How does a
that-
Vulcan lie in order to commit crime? Like,
He's truthful about it. And this is supposed to be a post-scarcity society where everyone's needs are met. So the fact that there's a planet with slums and crime doesn't make a lot of sense, because that means there is scarcity and there is problems and that you are not meeting everyone's needs. So I mean, like, that part is kind of against the grain of what we think Star Trek to be.
Can someone actually remind me, what is this planet? What is District 6? Is it the Federation?
It's Metalis 4, and I believe it's a Federation world because they had a recruiting outpost on it.
Although they could have I guess that's right, but it's just wild to me because they're using money, right? Like in the very first episode, there are like transactions where it'll say, like, transaction proposed, transaction accepted, and they're exchanging some form of currency, and the Federation is supposed to not be currency money based anymore. So this is all very confusing.
Is it like a protectorate? And they're not, so you have a mixed system of it's not a territory, but
I had thought that it was kind of like a Ferengi territory, kind of like Virgin Islands, US Virgin Islands or Guam, where it's kind of in the US, but not really a state, not really there, because the Ferengi are there. And I thought, well, the Ferengi are very money driven, so maybe it's one of those. But I agree, you're absolutely right. It was a little bit confusing about what's going on with all of this money situation here. This whole episode threw me for a loop. It started with the Vulcan, and I just couldn't wrap my head around it.
Yeah, and he's wearing the IT kit, the infinite diversity and infinite combinations. So like, he's spouting logic, he's doing Vulcan-y things, but he's a crime boss. It is brilliant in its creativity, and the fact that a Vulcan and Ferengi were bros because they grew up together, that's also weird. But they grew up on an impoverished planet. So is there scarcity there that then caused this to not go according to plan? I mean, it makes sense for Bajor to go through a rough time post Cardassian occupation, because they were occupied for a century. Like, problems happened because of that, and it takes a while to recover. But this, what is it? Like, I mean, it works for the story, but it doesn't make sense when you start thinking about how the Federation is supposed to be kind of a utopia.
I guess, though, that's a quick question that I have. Can you join Starfleet and not be a citizen of a member state or a member planet?
Yes.
Then okay, so I'm gonna assume that the recruitment center was not evidence that it was definitely a Federation world, and instead that, like Dana was suggesting, it's some kind of independent or Ferengi territory or something, because it is very not Federation.
And
But
maybe it's showing the underbelly of the Federation. So like, it shows its good glossy side, but then when you turn it over, you can see all the mechanics and the underworkings and that things are a little rusty underneath. We see in this episode and in future episodes that, you know, how the Federation treated the changelings. You know, was it a war crime to poison all of their people just for the fact that they were changelings in the Great Blank? And perhaps this is one of the underbellies. Like, we gave you enough to sustain your body, but it's not enough for you to thrive. And so that may have happened on this world as well, where we're kind of seeing the chinks in the armor when we get up a little bit closer.
I went to law school in Sacramento at McGeorge, and it's a really weird neighborhood because you get the fabulous 40s, these $1 million homes, and then a block over, you have a slum. And then 2 blocks again, you're back to $1 million homes, and then back to extreme poverty. That doesn't make sense for that to happen a street over. Is Section 7 like that, with just poverty and wealth a block away from each other? Or was there some cataclysm that happened that disrupted the planet, war, refugees, whatever, that caused it to not be paradise?
And it could be regentrification, just like many other neighborhoods, just like the neighborhood that I live in. If you're at the top of the hill, there's no bus service, there's no transit, but everybody has a $1 million home. If you're at the bottom of the hill, everybody lives in apartments owned mostly by the people who live at the top of the hill. So I could see that happening.
Yeah, because again, this is one of the rare times we actually get to see like a normal city or city state. Because normally in Trek, everything is command and everything's happy and peppy, and they're in Voyager, he's getting, you got Kim getting Vulcan mochas, and everyone's doing good. It's the fun part of the Embarcadero, as opposed to a downtrodden area of San Francisco. So it's a very weird situation, but there's crime there, and it looks like Rico.
Yeah, I was going to say, I want to bring us back to the original topic. I did want to mention one thing, which is that it's actually less weird to me that there's a criminal Vulcan than I think some people, including you, Dana, and you, Josh, had as your initial reaction, simply because I think, having a core respect for logic, following it as your sort of religion, and adhering very strictly to rationality and logic does not necessarily mean you will be a good person. There's the other aspects of Vulcan culture and morality that you kind of have to weave in there, including that you don't harm other people, that you respect all life, all of those things. And so if you only have the logic part, you could be a sociopath. You could just not feel the pain that you inflict on other people or care about it. And so therefore everything you're doing seems supremely logical. And so I think it doesn't actually surprise me as much, especially because he clearly did not grow up ensconced in Vulcan culture and ways.
And we've seen Vulcans on the Titan not act like regular Vulcans, because after they escape the nebula, someone's hugging a Vulcan, the Vulcan's hugging back. He did not look like a Romulan, because it wasn't like he was smiling, but there was definitely like a higher emotional intelligence within that Vulcan that we've seen, others. It also goes to the point that Vulcans do have emotion. They just keep them in check. But it's like there are sensitive Vulcans now. Like, that's probably a good thing
Or maybe he learned to parrot the communication at the academy, just like Spock learned to shake hands, right? So maybe just hugging is one of those ways where he parrots back that communication without actually engaging in that type of emotional connection.
All possibilities. I don't think that background character is going to get a story built out on why they're willing to hug, but
Josh, we can dream.
we can. Well, I mean, I thought in a
Stay
mirror
tuned
unit,
for episode 10.
named the Hugging Vulcan. I was hoping, like with the mirror universe,
The
that
Vulcan hug. Oh my god, I love it.
they're just warm and it feels good. Uh
The reverse mind meld.
the Vulcans just do what feels right. Like that's the basis of their society, and Klingons would be like the artists and the poets, and the Romulans would have a nice thriving democracy based upon civil rights and freedom. That to me would be the fun mirror universe in Trek, but that's not what we get. So we then going back to this, it's Ro interrogates Picard, and it immediately raises the issue of, like, is this a custodial interrogation? Should Picard have been alerted to his right to counsel? And it just seems a little problematic that Commander Ro comes in and is asking all the hard questions. Did either of you have the Miranda reaction to that exchange? Nope. Seeing shaking heads, no. Nara is clearly pondering the situation.
Well, she semi Mirandized him at the start, which was she did say anything that you say can be used against you if charges are brought. It is interesting to me that charges have apparently not been brought, although she previews that the charges they are considering are treason. Yeah, that's tough. I think I guess at no point do we see Picard just say, I would like to leave. Can I please leave? That would be sort of your core test. If you were actually in custody, you were supposed to be fully Mirandized to make sure that you have a right to an attorney. Yeah, I think this one's tough because I don't think he actually asks, can I please go now? My shuttle is here. My Uber has arrived.
Dana, anything to add?
Yeah, I think that she's just right on point, and that at no time is he taken into custody. And in fact, they're having a conversation with all the security outside of the room. And while she's interrogating him, maybe she's the person who's like the inspector or the detective. But it's not clear that she's the person who's going to make the arrest.
And Picard's able to get the message from Beverly about the alien autopsy, that the changelings can perfectly mimic human anatomy now down to the organ level. And yeah, that's problematic. And he does have a good poker face. Now it brings the issue of Picard and Riker's actions and getting the Titan under false pretenses to engage in everything they've engaged in. And Star Trek really likes testing the necessity offense, because this was about saving Beverly, and they eventually learned Jack, because Beverly doesn't mention Jack in the initial message. But could they have argued that we believe Beverly was an imminent threat of death? There was, a reason for them to do this. Do either of you want to weigh into that, or shall we wait till a little further along at the conclusion on the necessity defense for aggressively borrowing a starship?
I would say that we should wait a little bit, because I think
Okay.
there's more that's going to come up. One of the things that I do think that we can talk about with Ro and with her investigation is abusive process, a civil abusive process charge. And to have abusive process, it's the willful act of using a criminal or civil legal process against another to accomplish a purpose for which it is not designed, is an abusive process. So was that process designed to determine whether or not he is a changeling and whether or not he can be trusted? No. But would it rise to the level such that it's something that would be actionable? I would say probably not, because it's not something that's so shocking to the conscience, or that it would fall under one of the spellings categories, and that's SPELLENS, so that it could be interpreted as something that is just such improper conduct. But again, that's something that we could probably look at. Had she been a changeling who was using the process to capture Picard or capture Jack so that they can use it for whatever other purpose, then I would conclude differently, that it was being used for some other improper process.
a lot happens in this episode with moving the plot forward about the changeling threat. And part of that threat is we find out how badly Starfleet's compromised, that Ro won't even use the transporter, that she doesn't trust it. That might be a plot point later on. Jack is hallucinating as people were being beamed. And that made me think back to one of the Barclay episodes, where there were living creatures in the matter stream, and that you had crew trapped in the matter stream from another ship that they were able to eventually rescue. So is it something like that going on here? We don't know. But there's an eventual.
Is that how the changelings replace people?
Yeah. Well, don't want to get into spoilers since you're a little behind.
Oh,
But,
sorry.
But I mean, Vadic also does not use a transporter. Vadic herself gets a shuttle. So who knows?
yeah, but we see others beaming around because they're in this episode. We see changelings beam out of Ro's shuttle. And there's a fight with 4 changelings who beam on board the Titan with Jack. And Jack kills them all. Brilliant fight. And we get to see changelings move in ways that are, very changeling-esque, that people with bones can't do, with like resetting things. And he takes all 4 of them out. That's not easy to do. And he confides to his mother at the end that, yay, I'm seeing things, something isn't right. But Dana, I believe you raised the issue of justifiable homicide for Jack and killing those 4 changelings that were trying to abduct him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if it's homicide and he's protecting his own life, that's great. He can protect his own life. But in the episode, Beverly Crusher asked him, hey, how did you know they were changelings? How do you know they weren't just regular Starfleet guys? And he's like, I didn't. And so that's like, oh no, Jack, you're guilty of a crime now, because these were people who were enacting your lawful arrest, right? But instead, you just killed them. So what if they hadn't been changelings? And so that makes it very difficult. So if he knew that they were the individuals who were chasing him down, that were stalking him, that were trying to kill him, then he would have been justified. But otherwise, it's like, walking down the street and just shooting any random person.
But it's a little different than that because they were trying to kidnap him. And self-defense and lethal self-defense can include kidnapping. Now, that is still highly problematic because if you know that you could be dealing with individuals who are either changeling or human, and you could have both, you could have some unknowing humans who are following changeling orders. He could have just killed a dude by defending himself. So it is super problematic. He was just lucky they were all changelings for the one that he threw that bent in a way that a human being can't bend, changeling. Would have objectively known that part, changeling. The other 3, I don't think he knew for sure.
What I heard from Dana at the top of this also was that, at least from Jack's point of view at the start of this encounter, it appeared to be a lawful arrest. Is that right? Mm-hmm. So that's really important, because if you happen to get lucky and resist arrest, and it turns out that the police had falsified the warrant and it was an unlawful detention, and therefore that essentially is an attempted kidnapping, that's one thing. But if you can't know that at the start, and if somebody shows up with a badge and a warrant and says you're under arrest, and you decide to resist it anyway, then that's a crime.
But for Jack, it would be defendable because the insanity defense would kick in for him, because you could argue he did not know the wrongfulness of his actions because he just clicked into a pre-programmed mode for going full Jason Bourne on these guys and killing them all. So it's messy. I would not want to have to defend that fact pattern, but it's defendable at least if one of them had been human.
I think that it's not defendable in any situation, actually, because if they're just trying to effect his arrest, they weren't trying to kill him, they were just trying to arrest him, then you're only allowed to use so much force as to stop the crime. You can't take the next step. So it's kind of like how you tell kids, if someone uses words, you can't use fists. And so here, Jack could escape. He could use as much force necessary for him to escape if he thought that they were going to kidnap him. He could stop the attack, but I don't think that he could take the next step of killing them unless he thought that they were going to use deadly force or had the opportunity to use deadly force against him.
I think he was in the right for what he did because of the kidnapping threat, and also because of the totality of the circumstances with what they had just gone through with Vatic, that he could justifiably be afraid for his life with these people who are trying to pull him off the Titan at gunpoint.
Sure.
So, but it is debatable, and reasonable minds can come to a very different conclusion about, was he right or wrong to do what he did? And if it was the wrong thing to do, can he be defended for it? And
I mean, if I were a person who was having these hallucinations that I could sometimes control and could not sometimes control, and I had been chased all over the universe by all different manner of individuals, then I would probably be a little perturbed, and I would probably a little bit more on edge than the average person. So I could see him wanting to get out of that situation immediately, if not faster.
Yeah, I think overall I'm with Dana on this one, but I do want to note that as I often do, with prosecutorial discretion, it is possible, since they turned out to be changelings, that Starfleet is not going to be interested in trying to try him for the homicide of what turns out to not be Starfleet officers.
and that could be, that's the Alonzo Bowden, it seemed like a good idea at the time defense of being able to go, Your Honor, it seemed like a good idea at the time because this was happening. And the reaction could be like, well, you were lucky this time. Don't do that again. Like,
oh man, my brain is also just thinking about, like, in this era of Starfleet, what if it became just like a constant thing anytime there was a fight or a shooting or something? Oh, I thought he was a changeling. Oh no.
yeah, that would be bad. And again, that would be twisting self-defense. It's again, those who say like, well, I feared for my life. It's like, you shot a person on the sidewalk because they walked by your house. That's happened. So there are 911 calls. I think the guy was in Texas, and like, again, not okay. Like that's not self-defense. What Jack went through arguably is, but you get the very messy issue of impersonating Starfleet and not knowing friend from foe. And so, not to spoil the end of the story for Nari with how they find out that
It's okay. I have accepted the risk by being here.
Yeah, but we're gonna play it safe. They realize that there's a serious issue at Starfleet with how badly it's compromised. And Shaw recognizes the situation and gives an order to the crew that Starfleet is compromised, and there's an actual command and command code for them to follow, meaning that the disaster group at Starfleet figured out, we're going to have this for if we get compromised. We got shapeshifters who can pretend to be people if it's compromised, or people need to have a plan that they can follow. And he gives that order and everyone springs into action.
Well, presumably they should have had this protocol ever since the end of season 1 of Next Generation, right?
Yes, from Conspiracy. Yes, and definitely probably updated after the Dominion War. Perhaps during the Dominion War, updates were made sporadically with the situation that was going on with that war. He's dynamic. And again, the Strange New podcast did an interview with Todd Skadswick, the actor. Seems like a cool dude. Again, be fun to have him over for a barbecue. Likes playing D&D, so Nari, get ready with those D&D questions for him. And yeah, I'm I'm all for a Titan series at this point, because I would like to see him and Seven and the bridge crew who is effective go out and do things. Now, we don't normally cover 3 episodes at a time, so let's just do some other issue spotting to make sure we haven't missed anything. One of you included at the end, this would have gone to no win scenario with Riker throwing the asteroid at Vedek's ship. Who brought that issue up? Dana.
Guilty is charged. Guilty is charged. And so in that episode, it brings up, just kind of recap, Vedek first throws a ship at them. And it's like, wow, you threw a ship at us. So then Riker's like, you know what? As we're trying to escape, I think that I'm going to throw an asteroid at you. And so he's able to maneuver the ship and have them grasp something and then full stop so that it throws the asteroid at them. And that brought to mind the plaintiff's felonious conduct rule. And so in a civil claim for damages based on negligence, a plaintiff can't recover any damages if the plaintiff's injuries were in any way caused by the plaintiff's own commission of a felony or flight from a felony. So here we've got Vedek's ship. They're creating the felony. They're doing the felony stalking. They're chasing people around. So she could not then sue the Titan for damage to her own ship, or for fear or intentional infliction of emotional distress or negligent infliction of emotional distress, because the damages are a direct result of her own felonious conduct.
Good analysis. You also added one for Shaw about negligent entrustment. Can you help us understand that?
Yeah, so Shaw just says, hey, you know what, Riker? I'm injured. You take over. You're the captain on the ship. I don't know why he would give it to Riker as opposed to, say, someone else who's in the chain of command that he knows is on his ship who can handle the ship. But that goes to another Star Trek issue about why he doesn't trust his people. But he hands the ship over to another captain and he's like, get us out of here. Save my ship, right? And then so he's like, you're in charge. And what does Riker do? He decides to go deeper into trouble rather than to just get his people out of there. And so was it a negligent entrustment for him to give the Titan to Riker? Should he have done something else? Was Riker wrong for doing something other than just, getting the crew and the ship out of there?
Shaw's direction was get us out of this mess.
Yeah, and so, a defendant who gives a driver of a vehicle, and we'll say here that the Starship, the Titan, is a vehicle, they give them limited permission. And here, Shaw gave Riker limited permission to use the ship in a specific way. So it would be like me giving my son permission to drive my car to go to school. But then he decides he's going to take a trip to Baja, Mexico, right, and get some fish tacos. Like, not okay. So
Yeah,
he exceeded the scope.
but I think it's a little different because it's not go to school, it's take grandma to the emergency room. I think would be a better analogy, and maybe he runs a stop sign because grandma's in distress. Like, so there's, like making a command decision based upon the situation. And this isn't, like deliver the sandwiches, to grandma. This is, we have to get away from the ship that's chasing us, that is highly well armed, that completely outguns us, and has a wonder weapon that creates portals that keeps us trapped places. So I think Shaw's entrustment to Riker was because you've dealt with weird things before. We're going to need you to deal with more weird things to get us out of here and get everyone to safety.
And it could be Shaw's crazy logic, because I don't like Shaw, but so that's why I don't see the best in him. But perhaps he was like, hey, I really don't like Riker and I really don't like Picard. And rather than saddle someone on my crew that I really do like because I selected them and I let them stay here, instead of saddling them with this type of craziness. I'm going to put it right back on the people who caused this in the first place.
But we've seen officers not like Picard before because of the Borg issue, and famously being Captain Sisko, like openly not a fan at the beginning of Deep Space Nine, because he was on the Saratoga, lost his wife, lost Lord knows how many people on board, and was very upset at Picard when they have their exchange. So how many other people fall into that category in interacting with Picard? So we've seen the hero worship group. How many people have PTSD because he nearly killed them when he was Locutus? So there's I find that fascinating to think about. That you have, at this point in Star Trek history, you have people who were ensigns or lieutenants at the time that Picard was taken by the Borg in the Battle of Wharf 359, and who are now in command officer positions. They probably harbor resentment. While people who are, an ensign fresh out of the academy have the starry-eyed hero, who might look at his entire career as opposed to the time that he nearly killed them. Because I could see that being at play. All of that said, I am loving the series, and from the music to the storytelling, and we got lots of great spaceship action. And we'll get into the later episodes where there are just some wonderful performances that know how to pull at heartstrings. So there's a lot of warm, happy feelings associated with watching Picard right now.
Yep.
And I am totally, oh, sorry, go ahead.
You first. Nope, you first.
I'm totally geeking out of all the guest stars that are on the show. And if they brought Sisko in, I would just like drop dead. You'd have to resuscitate me.
There were some folks who thought that Sisko would make an appearance in the episode that just aired, and they were wrong. But it was another guest star who was awesome to see. So I was like, that person's back. So cautiously optimistic that we see Sisko, because they, again, will this like have the Avengers Assemble ending where you see Sisko and Janeway and other people who should be captains and admirals by now showing up, like who's in charge of the Enterprise F. So there's again, there'll be ways that they'll make everyone geek out. And I think because of the bounty episode, which they clearly know how to just give amazing nostalgia to fans, that I really want them to end on a high note for one last ride. So with that, Nari, anything to add?
This series won me over as soon as they brought Michael Dorn back. That is all I wanted to say.
He is so good. He's
I'm in love. And if you're single, Michael Dorn, I'm available. Just saying. If you're not single,
And I will also say, Michael Dorn, I'm not available, but you are on my list.
He's your kitchen pass.
I did not need to know that. Okay, so now having that knowledge, everyone, thank you. Stay tuned for more catch up as we catch up, so we can have more to cover this amazing series. We'll try to have something for First Contact Day. And until then, everyone, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay geeky.